Howdy, I'm John, and I'm here to tell you about my experience putting a 5950 Ryzen to replace my 3900X. And so that required a BIOS update. It had been over a year since I'd updated the BIOS. The chip has been released since then in such a way that my motherboard didn't support it until I uploaded BIOS beforehand. This is a 16 core, very strong chip, and it runs nice and cool. You want to make sure you save the plastic packaging and the original cardboard box also, because you can pop this out and resell it someday. There's a golden triangle. And look at all them golden pins. Forget how many. It's something like 900 in there or something like that. It's a very substantial little chip. When you drop it into the slot, you really feel it drop down. So here's how I uploaded the BIOS. You want to make sure that you got a little dongle set to FAT32 file system. You're going to have to change it to that because whatever you buy is probably going to be set to 64. Go ahead and set it up in your computer when you plug it in. Then in this case I went to Gigabyte website and I looked for the x570 Aurous Master version 1.1. Now, people are scared about flashing the BIOS, and I am also. It's a reasonable fear to be very cautious. If something goes wrong, you could really screw your motherboard up. So make sure you get the right file, and I think that's where most people go wrong. They pick the wrong motherboard or something like that. Also, you want to make sure that you're hooked to a battery backup, so if your power does go out, hopefully it'll get loaded in and done before the battery lets go. So you got all these updates that come out regularly. Anytime there's a big security patch that they find, which is a new update for this one. In this case, I'm really concerned about the 5000 series Ryzen, so I could make sure that one fits in. I was on version F30 beforehand. I wound up installing F32 here, and then went back and installed up to F35. Why I didn't go to 35? Well, I thought this was the top of the page because I was excited. I already had 35 loaded in the dongle. And I decided, hey, I'll just go ahead and film this. And now I wound up only loading 32 in. So I wound up loading it up 3 times. So I'm getting good at it now. That's the thing about this computer stuff. You just need to work at it and have fun. Look upon it as a puzzle. So you extract the file direct to the little dongle flash drive. Then you remove all of the files except for the actual BIOS update, which will be labeled .f something. In this case, since it's going to be flashing through the motherboard and the BIOS itself that you're going to be in under the Q-Flash system, you don't have to rename it. And I don't think this little white slot really works. I tried it with that, and that's what I did when I first flashed it over a year ago when I didn't have a CPU on it. And I wound up having to try 2 or 3 different little BNC slots. Now here I am flashing the BIOS. Everything's going okay. But it's nerve-wracking. It's going to take 3, 5, 10 minutes, and you don't want to touch it. You don't want to impact it. Walk away and have a cup of coffee, and you come back and it's still uploading. So walk around and vacuum or something like that. You need to stay away from it. Just let it do its thing. And then when it gets done, it's going to reboot. And mine had a little bit of thing where I didn't film it. I wish I had kept the camera rolling, because it did ask me a couple other things when it detected that there was a new CPU. And then you want to go into BIOS and reload your default settings and stuff like that. But it all goes pretty easy. To get into this, instead of hitting the delete key, you hit the end key. So here we are after everything's all loaded up. I'm going ahead and taking the little sad GPU off, which is what we have to go through nowadays. This machine is for CPU processing of a particular application. I leave it running 24/7. And since the 5950X runs about 40-45% more work, it's worth shifting over from the 3900X. So then I go ahead and take out that middle fan. It's a little tight working inside the case like this, but I think overall it's easier than taking the motherboard out for such a small thing if you've got space in the case. And then start using the BeQuiet special magnetized long Phillips head screwdriver, and bit by bit alternating between the sides, loosen those screws, and then finally remove them entirely. You don't want to undo just one side and then the other. You alternate back and forth so that the metal is stressed a little more evenly. This is especially important when you are installing it, because the top of the CPU is actually a little conical shaped, and the flat base of the cooler mashes down on it and kind of flattens everything out. And it's all very, very scientifically designed. Give that a little bit of a side-to-side wiggle before you pop it off so that you don't pop the CPU out of its socket. You can see we had a lot of good coverage. That's because I used a little bit much thermal paste, and it squeezed out the sides. But it wasn't as bad as I feared it might be. It certainly had good coverage. I'm using this here solvent-based cleaning solution. Alcohol works fine too, but you put a little bit of this on and it just totally softens and it comes right off. And then you use a purifier type thing to clean the residue of that off. But it's much more effective than alcohol. It costs a lot more. You know, it's like how often you do this. So like the $10 bottle set will last you 15 or 20 years. Alright, pull that lever back. Give me a lever and a fulcrum and I move the world. Archimedes said that. Now I got a little bit of thermal paste that flew off into the socket area. I better make sure that doesn't get down into those holes. Yep. This was too much thermal compound. Now the best bet would have been to have taken a blower right at this moment and blowing that off. But I started poking around at it and that wasn't a good idea. Ooh, no, don't do that. Oh, no, no. But this stuff is dry and flaky. So once I took the blower to it, blew right out. I hadn't come to that yet. I figured I'd dig it out with a toothpick. No, John, don't do that. And then when I saw how flaky it was, yeah, that's all it needs is to be blown out. Long story short, socket went in just fine. It's running very well, very strong, very happy. And it's actually running cooler than the 3900X did. So the bottom left is where that there golden corner triangle has to go. It matches that little corner you can see down there, a little triangle. Here's a more reasonable amount of thermal paste. So this is bigger than a grain of rice, but it's way smaller than a small pea. So I'll get a little closer to a small pea. There we go. I'm happy now. I'm pretty confident this is not going to squirt all over the place. So normally I'd recommend a fit check before you add that, but this is the same cooler that's already been on. So during the installation, it is vitally important that you only tighten those a little bit at a time and you even the torque between them. This is the one of the most elemental mechanical aspects of computer building there is installing this. It's a lot like putting an intake manifold on a car. And this is one of the aspects of computer building where I actually torque down a little bit. You don't want to strip the threads, but this needs to be installed nice and tight. That's designed to pull the most heat from the CPU, let the thermal paste conduct it up to that cooler, and then the cooler disseminate it through the cooler, and the airflow go through there, just pulling that heat away. The rest is just reinstallation. It scored 22,000 something on Cinebench R23. It's a really, really good CPU for multitasking. And add on enough RAM. Make sure you got a really good motherboard for this CPU too, because a good motherboard and a good power supply combined with it will deliver the optimum power and allow the CPU to make full use of its capabilities. If you've got an inadequate motherboard, it's just not going to do as well. If you're going to lay the money for this out, make sure your motherboard will handle it. Otherwise, you're not going to get the full use. Well, thank you folks for watching. We'll see you around now. Do you know this thing's running just fine.